Aujourd'hui, on a le plaisir d'accueillir Claudio Faccenna, qui est professeur à l'Université de Rome 3, dans le département des sciences, puisqu'apparemment, il vient de m'expliquer qu'ils avaient fusionné sciences de la Terre et tout le reste, ils avaient été obligés de le faire. Donc c'est un tectonicien, un géodynamicien. Je ne vais pas faire une introduction très longue, mais c'est quelqu'un qui s'intéresse à essayer de comprendre quelles sont les relations entre les expressions en surface de la tectonique des plaques et ses causes en profondeur, la convection mantélique et tout ce qui lie tout ça ensemble. Et dans l'annonce de son séminaire, il y avait un bloc diagramme de la structure profonde de la Méditerranée, qui est quelque chose que j'ai vu circuler, déjà réutilisé dans plein d'exposés, qui me semble magique. J'ai jamais réussi à comprendre quelle était la structure du manteau sous les volcans italiens, mais bon, donc il va entre autres nous parler de tout ça. Merci encore d'être venu.
D'accord. Peut-être. Merci Marc, bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être ici, très honoré. Et je vais vous discuter avec vous un peu des progrès qu'on est en train de faire concernant les relations entre la formation des chaînes de montagnes et la convection del manteau. Donc, c'est une recherche qu'on a commencé, ça fait longtemps, avec un certain nombre de collègues. D'ailleurs, Thorsten Becker, qui est plus ici, vient bouger à Austin. Jean-Pierre, Laurent, il y a plein de gens de français aussi et d'italiens. Malheureusement, je pense que j'aurai quelques problèmes à ménager toute la conférence en français, donc si ça ne vous dérange pas, je vais switch in English. Sorry about that. It's going to be a little bit easier for me. What is convection? Actually, we do have a pretty good idea what is convection, especially behind a large plate. For example, this is a diagram showing that just inverting tomography for density, we may obtain on for example, the Pacific, a pretty good idea of resembling the model can do a good match of the geodesy and so the plate motion. So behind the large oceanic plate, we do have a pretty good idea of how convection works. But when you go behind the continent, things get a little bit more complex. And this diagram, for example, shows that trying to match the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, there are two competing models that has come out just in the same year. One is proposing the large-scale convection may drive dynamic topography and an uplift of the Colorado Plateau. On the other side, it's just a small-scale convection that may drive the same process. So it's more complicated what happened behind continent, and we do not really know what happened. And if you go down, look at the plate margin, this is even more complicated. In the plate margin, there are propositions that show that the size and the style of convection can be very small, like a small-scale cell, can be at the size of the whole upper mantle, for example, explaining the off-axis volcanism that you may see, for example, in China, or can be the whole mantle convection relating to subduction. So you can have the whole range of size of mantle convection. So the debate is still very active. And when you go to the mountain, the problem in the mountain, it's very interesting because the relationship between the mantle convection and the formation of the mountain as the root, a very ancient root in our history. I mean, it's 100 years ago already we discussed that. Especially Holmes was proposing already that you may have, if you have convection, then you can convert what they call geosyncline into a mountain belt. And this is a very interesting experiment that Griggs at Harvard was doing actually. So just he was not believing in continental drift actually, but he was proposing meanwhile that the convection of the mantle is the only way to invert thick sedimentary pile that should deposit on passing margin into a large orogenic wedge, which is pretty interesting. So this is kind of experiment that I found very interesting. Then of course we have to go to John Dewey to have the first application of plate tectonics to the classical orogenic formation, and then we go to more recent time where a numerical model can really explore more in detail all this process. So the question, the basic question that I'd like to address with you is there any role of the mantle when you do when you build up an orogen or mountain build? So this is and what is the style of convection? Is there any role of that? So I think this is an interesting question and still very poorly addressed in a way. So I would try to convince you that this is the case, that the mantle have a very important role in mountain building. And to do that, I'll bring you first to a journey into the Tethyan belt from the Mediterranean to India, and then go to a larger scale to see if there is a connection between the Tethyan belt and the other side of the Atlantic going to the Cordillera, so comparing the two. So I will start first introducing the Tethyan belt, then go into the Mediterranean, which is the region that I know more, and then going through all these points. So briefly, Tethyan belt, it's a belt that runs from the Mediterranean down to Sumatra. This is a very nice map of Manuel Pubelier. The color here is not the rocks, it's the age of the formation. So already when you see the map, you have a direct understanding on the fact that this is an orogen that formed for the accretion of blocks that go from the Paleozoic to the recent time. So it's a long-term accretion of blocks. And this is probably the way you build up those blocks, break from Gondwana, attached to Asia, and this is probably the way you build up a very big continent. And during this process, you form mountain. But the size of the mountain can be very, very different. And this is the same scale here, and then you have a Kranset from Stéphane Guyot, and that, for example, go through here, and you see the size of what we think is the Himalayan Tibetan system. But then you can look at the Alps, and this is very small, actually. So you can have different sides of mountain along the same belt. So the question is, can this tell us something about the process behind? So geodesy gave a pretty good images of what's happening in this area. You have two continental blocks, well, three with Adria, if you like, but two that is going northward. Arabia here, India here, and they form the indent into the Eurasian continent, forming Maui Mountain Belt. And then you have this very nice, like mirror shape, lateral escape of material out from the high collision zone, high plateau, forming an Anatolia on one side, on Tibet on the other side. So it's a very interesting setting. But what is very interesting too is looking at what happened in the past in this area. So this little diagram is just a run from G-plates and show the evolution of the two continents during the breakup of Gondwana and accretion to Asia. So this is India and this is Arabia. And so in this diagram on the right is just showing the velocity of these two plates. So you see India is break up from Gondwana, basically from Seychelles, with the formation of the Deccan Trap, go very, very fast at 19 centimeters per year. This is the northward component, it's a little less. And then once it collides, it decreases the velocity down to about 5. But what is surprising, so this is okay in a way. We go very fast, then colliding and go slow down. What I think is very interesting here, that after the collision, the velocity keep constant for tens of million years. So irrespective of the fact that you are building up a big plateau, you are creating material, you are underplating a thick continental material of India, you are keeping go 5 centimeters per year. And the same for Arabia is even more surprising, because at the time it break up from the Africa, it keep going always at the same rate, 3 centimeters. So you build up, you are subducting some ocean, then continental material, then build up the Betelgeuse, Zagros, Caucasus, and keep going at the same rate. So this is a record of then a protracted continental collision. And the cause of that is still very uncertain, I would say. So just to briefly introduce you to the problem, this is a kind of redesigned Forsyth and Uyeda diagram, where you see the force at work in a system. And what you have is basically to have a mountain belt, to sustain a mountain belt, the black here, ridge push, mantle flow, plump, slab pull, whatever, have to be equal to 5. That is the basically potential energy. In collisional system, there are two forces on subduction system that we believe that are important. The first one is the slab pull, which is probably the force that drive all the plates. But when you go in collision, this is a little bit more complicated because usually after collision you have the entrance of continental material, then you can have a break-off of the slab. So we thought, and also continental material is lighter, so the slab pull forces tend to decrease during collision. So difficult to explain the fact that the velocity keeps constant. The other force is the mantle flow. Ridge push is not really large enough. Demonstrate a plumb push as well. The other force is the mantle flow, but that is completely uncertain. So for some people, the mantle is resisting the motion of the plates. For some other people, the mantle is pushing the plate. So there is a dichotomy here. And it's really depending on the way you look at the system, from the bottom or from the top. So and declare like a gap, at least a gap of discussion between different communities, I would say. Anyway, the problem then we would like to approach is if this mantle flow make any role in the system. And so I will start in the Mediterranean. So this is a diagram of the Mediterranean that probably most of you already see. It's the arrow here is the GPS. It's velocity with respect to Eurasia. The dot are the seismicity with the depth and color here. So we have only a little Guadalete-Benioff zone in Calabria and an intermediate seismicity beneath Aegea here that are hidden below the arrows. This is very nice, a spectacular counterclockwise rotation of the Arabia, Anatolia, Aegea system with an increase in velocity toward the Atlantic trench. So this is a kind of very interesting pattern. Also in Arabia, also in Adria, you have a very interesting trench. You see an acceleration. All this occurring during the convergence of Africa and Eurasia. We don't really have a lot of data on that, but this station, for example, should declare the way Africa is convergent to Eurasia. So it's very small, very low rate. And you have acceleration of the plate within this slowly convergent system, which means that other forces rather than the large-scale convergence should drive this microplate in the system. So, and what are those forces? Okay, so this is the question. And to address this question, you first have a look at the mantle. And when you look at the mantle, this is a P-wave model from Claudia and Andrea a long time ago, but I think it's still very, very useful. And there is under 50 kilometers, there's high velocity that go beneath the Alps, for example, on the Apennine and Calabria. Some phantom here, resolution get very bad here because, of course, we don't have station in Africa. But then Dinarites, Selenites, etc. And what is very interesting is that when you go deeper, this high velocity anomaly tend to merge together. And when you arrive to the bottom of the upper mantle, you have a very large high velocity material stagnating on the 616. So this means that a lot of material fall down into the mantle and now is there. And if you compare that, authentication. That's not, I find that's not my fault, huh? Where we are, okay. Yeah. And if you compare these images, for example, 150 with this one, 600, you see that you are looking at the complete size of convection because the high velocity material now is in the bottom and the low velocity material is in the top. So you are convecting very energetically your system. Seismic anisotropy gave a very good images when plotted on top of the tomography average of over 100 to 400 kilometers of the system. So what is seismic anisotropy? I think everybody knows here in the room. I should explain that? No, it's okay. I mean, I gave it for everybody can know. I mean, it's the, okay. So you asked me to be more clear as possible. So that's a very interesting pattern, actually, because when you look at the Western Mediterranean, you have a very consistent trend of east-west trending signal, and then it is turning around this way here. So everything seems to point out against the subduction zone that is still active here in Calabria. So everything seems to converge here, like kind of. And when you look at the other side, it's the same. So it's pointing out this way. And probably also in the Carpathian, you have the same system. So the things are getting more complicated when you go on top of the high velocity area, where the seismic anisotropy is a little bit more complex. There are trench perpendicular and trench parallel, but in the back arc area, this is a very consistent pattern. Very normal to the subduction zone and the trend. So I will look at more in detail of what happened in time, geological time. So I do not spend much time on the reconstruction, but it's pretty well established that the shape we have today of this arc derived from the fact that once upon a time this was a straight subduction zone running here, and then progressively rolling back to arrive into the present-day position where subduction is still active. And you open two big basins. The first one is the Ligure Provençal with the rotation of the Corsica Sardinia, and then at 16 million years, Sardinia arrived there and stopped. And then we have to wait for some million years before the Tyrrhenian starts expanding also, with two small oceanic basins, from the Pliocene onward, so very small jump. So you have not a continuous trend of extension, but jumping. In this system, compression is following by extension. So you have compression on the front and extension on the back. And this is the way a back arc trench system works if you have rollback. What is rollback is the way the trench is basically retreating with respect to the upper plate. So if you calculate that, it's more than 800 kilometers of rollback, which is enormous. From Calabria was somewhere here, and then now it's here, and episodically. So it's not a continuous process, but it's probably jumping. And the result, if you do a cross-section on the tomography, you have that guy. So a subduction zone plunging down to the 660 and then flat over the 660 basically. So this is a typical images of subduction zone that is retreating and leave the track lying on the upper lower mantle discontinuity. So you may restore that, and you can also may do some exercise. So taking your high velocity anomaly, drawing that in a very simple way, restore back in time for the amount of trench rollback. And what we realize when we do this very simple exercise is that the end of the first extensional episode, at the end of rotation of Sardinia Corsica, occurred just when the slab hit the 660 discontinuity. So more or less, this should be a trend, which is the upper lower mantle discontinuity is probably marking not only a transitional phase, but also probably a viscosity jump. And then the slab may deform and arrive into the present day. So we run very simple experiment in this case. So just taking a tank filled by glucose syrup, different viscosity. The lower layer is mimicking the lower mantle, so it's more viscous than the upper one, and putting on top of that a layer of silicon. It is a viscous fluid as well, more viscous than this one, a little bit denser, so only gravity playing. And what is interesting when we do this exercise that we found that this little slab is falling down into the upper layer, but then when we encounter the discontinuity, it slows down, it deforms, and then progressively arrive to this kind of shape that resembles very much to this one. And also the timing could be fine also, but then doing this experiment, we realized a fundamental thing. This was a long time ago, but the thing is that the slowdown occurred just because when you fall down this layer, you are basically decreasing the material, the possibility for the material to flow down to the slab. So you are you can dissipate the overpressure on this area that half of the slab retreat only by pushing material in this area. And when you close this window, then you have hard time to keep going other than going laterally. So the flow have to have another pattern, which is we call toroidal. So from poloidal, we switch to toroidal. And this was a fundamental effect. At the time, numerical model was not able to capture that because it was only in 2D. And in the tank, you are forced to imagine how is your lateral sides of your system. So this was pretty interesting. Actually, now we can do better model. For example, this is a model that can mimic probably better this stop and go phase in the Mediterranean with the same principle. Like this is a continent, top view. There are two continents, an ocean in the middle. So you have a very simplified pattern. You start with, this is a cross section in the middle of the model, and this is the rollback velocity, and then this is the oblique view. So you start your process of subduction. The slab arrive to the 660 discontinuity here. The two continents arrive in collision, and then slightly they try to subduct. Your rollback velocity increase, but at a certain moment are too buoyant to subduct anymore. So what you have to do is basically to wait and this break of the slab completely laterally, and then at this moment you can have another phase of back arc extension and then a decrease. So the two phases probably in 3D are more complex, are related to the fact that you have a lateral entrance of continental material, so you break your system in a way, and then you have to wait to break off your slab to have the second pulses of back arc extension. But the question is that, okay, this is all fine, but can we really imagine how the mantle is convecting now in the Mediterranean? And that's the point. Well, to do that, I knock on the door of my friend Torsten and say, well, can we do that, going more regionally? And then we try to force a little bit the classical side of global convection that geodynamists do, and try to go more regional. That is, taking the tomography, inverting the tomography for density, so saying thermal, only temperature is matter, not chemical composition, which is a big assumption, but this is something we have to start with, and then let the system go only under convection. So the more denser stuff will go down, the less dense stuff go up, and then you have solid convection. And looking on the surface, what happened? And we can check if our model is going in the right direction, looking at GPS on microplate, looking at dynamic topography, and looking at seismic anisotropy. So that's basically what we've done. So the system is work like that. The white is the result of the model, the orange is the GPS, you already saw before, and the gray arrow, all with respect to a Regiafix, and the gray arrow is basically imposed by us, so it's the motion of Africa. This is not, of course, the motion of Africa. It doesn't depend on what happened in the Mediterranean. It's such a big plate, and Arabia. So this was the result in terms of kinematics. So we have, well, we were okay, happy. So the Anatolia is moving eastward. Aegea, no. So we're very sorry. But Adria is going in the right direction. So it's moving, turning a little bit more northeastward with respect to the motion of Africa. But what we found interesting here is that looking at cross-section, you better appreciate what the message should be under this kind of calculation. Is that this is the Hellenic slab here, this is the Calabrian slab, this is the Caucasus. Basically what we saw is that large upwelling here that go against, drive a little bit the Anatolia farther westward, and then you have the rolling back of the Hellenic trench, then your convection cell go up, go down, and then go up again in the Massif Central. So what you have is that like a small scale convection operating. So when you go down to the 660, everything gets flat, no more convection basically, everything is more larger scale. So what we capture from here is not basically the result, but what was interesting is to see that if you have the high resolution of tomography, then you can scale your convection cell down to 200 kilometers, which is the size of our macroplate in the Mediterranean. So that's interesting. And you can check that with tomography, with anisotropy, and if it's blue is fine, if it's red is bad, and you can see that this return flow, a large-scale return flow driven by the subduction system is okay here, well imaged by the model. Other area doesn't work. For example, the Alps are still under discussion. Why is this going this way? And then also in, of course, more complicated pattern you see directly on the nearby the velocity, the velocity, the subduction zone. Then you can check with dynamic topography. And dynamic topography, what is dynamic topography? It's the topography related to the convection. So if we expect, like in marine science, they all know that the sea level change is a function of the temperature because we have convection. Also in the Earth, they should work like that. But the discussion is if the signal is large enough to be captured once you filter out your signal by isostasy, which is represent the first order, of course, signature. That's what we can see in the Mediterranean. So what we can do is to calculate first the residual topography. The residual topography is just the topography once you filter the isostasy. So you take a crustal thickness, a density of the crust, a mantle lithosphere thickness, you say certain density, you filter from your topography, and you get this is the result. Well, we have done a lot of exercise on that. There are some signals that I think are very robust here. For example, in Iberia, the topography is red, the residual topography, which means that Iberia is too high with respect to what it should be. And also in Anatolia, and also some other area, I suspect is too low. What you can do also is to compare that with the dynamic topography. This is only calculated by convection model. So it's only theoretical. And you can compare the two to see if there is something good that come out from the comparison. And also you can go in the field, this is very more important, I think, and look if the signal that we have found can be really resembling to that. And we think that, for example, at least part of the signal we have on topography in Iberia, on the mesetas, is due to the fact that you have a very low velocity zone here. And Anatolia probably do the same, but there is a long way to go to understand better that. You can also go in the mountain belt on the convergent side, and there, this is a section from Gulf of Lyon to Corsica to Apennine. The structure of the Apennine is here. So under this small-scale convection, the mountain that you form, this one, this kind of mountain, small, the thickness of the mountain cannot exceed 40 kilometers, the crust. The elevation of the mountain is usually low, and then you have a lot of exhumation of high-pressure rock here, and deep foridipdesian, and this is the structure that you have below. What is interesting in the Apennine, actually, if you do a cross-section here, this is the last earthquake somewhere here, from northern Apennine to central Apennine from Calabria, is the topography changing laterally. So you have a very high topography in the center, a very low topography, no, very low, this average topography is around 200 meters, so it's not a mountain, but it's just a hilly side. Good wine though. and in Calabria is you're going down as well. So, but when you look at the crustal thickness, then you realize immediately that this system doesn't work for isostasy, because the area where you have higher topography has a smaller crustal thickness, and vice versa on the other area. So it means that there is a dynamic topography signal that is very strong here, and you may calculate the residual topography again and match the trend of the topography and also the dynamic topography trend that matches well. And if you look at what happened below in the mantle, then you realize immediately what is the cause. Because negative dynamic topography is related to the fact that you have a subduction zone here that is really pulling down the system. And the average topography is residual topography around 300 meters, 400 meters. That means that on average, the Calabria should be 300 meters more higher than it is. Average topography, it's a lot. Because in Calabria there are peaks also at 2,000 meters, 1,000 meters. So it means that you have really a big signal. And also the same for the northern Apennine. And the central Apennine, vice versa, is positioned on a a window on the slab, so it's low velocity anomaly, and that's the result. So where you have the subduction zone that is still pulling, you can really depress the topography for some hundreds of meters, which is a quite interesting result. We should revise most of our concept on mountain belt on topography, looking at this kind of data, actually. So concluding the Mediterranean, what we found is that, okay, the subduction system is clear here. It drives everything, and it produces a very large return flow, that very good signal on the anisotropy, and all this episodic extension, all this mechanism of microplate formation, a very, very fast microplate motion, have to be related to this mantle process. There may be a contribution of course, of extrusion, but the acceleration of Aegea or the motion of Adria should be related to that. And in this case, the mountain that we form are basically low topography, the very low crustal thickness, below 450 kilometers, and you have a large exhumation because the trench is retreating, you make a lot of space for exhumation of high pressure unit. Okay, we learned something here. Does this message apply also to other very large collision zone? And for that, we have to move on the other side of the Tethys, but then we have to take another tomography here, a larger scale. This is S-mean, it's just an average tomography. You can take others, but the message is still there. You capture very large scale feature like the Afar plume, the Kasbek plume, and the Tethyan subduction zone. And just to compare, what we were looking before is this Mediterranean high resolution tomography, and you can compare with that. So it's clear that the scale of the process we're going to look at now is completely different. And this is the result of this kind of inversion. So same process, taking the tomography, inverting, and looking at what happened on the surface. So you have, on red, you have the plate boundary. On white is the result of the model. So all the plates now are free to move wherever they want. And on yellow are the GPS, okay? So you can compare directly the result of convection to the GPS. And we had a very good result, actually, without doing much in terms of adjusting parameters for the velocity of India. And then we go very bad here, for example, no return flow. This model has no GPA in it, so there is no potential energy, so this is very difficult. But we also do a good job here, for example. So we were very satisfied by the Arabian-India motion, very badly satisfied by the Africa motion and Australia. But this is not important, actually. We also tested that was not that relevant for the system. But what is the game? Why is it moving this way? And to look at that, you have to go deeper in our model at 300 kilometers. And then you realize immediately that what is driving this two microplate is the coupling between the Tethyan slab that is still there, is in blue, and the low velocity zone, it's the Afar plume and the Kasbek. So these two systems, if you do a cross section, they provide you basically a conveyor belt. So the blue is going down, the red is going up, and the little plate on top, Arabia, just keep going, surfing on this conveyor belt. So it's probably a major actor in the system, this mantle drag here, that is keep driving the same velocity Arabia against Eurasia, forming mountain belt, keep constant with the same scale for decades or millennia. And this is even more clear when you look at the India system, where you have the Kasbek ridge here upwelling, very fast velocity, and downwelling in the Tethys. So this is another kind of conveyor belt. So for example, if I do a cross-section here from Kasbek ridge to Tibet, the Himalaya, this is the same cross-section that you saw before, very simplified. And this is the route of the Himalaya there. Then in this case, the shape of the mountain belt is completely different what we saw before. It's the thickness, first of all, is very large. You create a plateau with a crustal thickness that exceeds 60 to 70 kilometers. You need to have a retro subduction for sure, because you have a lot of compression here. So you have to let mantle material going down backward. and then you have the main subduction zone. So you basically have a double vergent structure with a lot of crust that thicken here. The way it thicken, we don't know. I'm not going to discuss that. And when you go deeper into the detail, into the mantle, you see that the root of this system is there. There's a big high-velocity zone that you can follow from Sumatra to the Aegean, basically, and probably broken off from the underplating slab. So if you also look at the timing of penetration of this high-velocity anomaly into the lower mantle, then you can make some calculation, you arrive here. The trench, probably at the time the high-velocity anomaly was falling into the lower mantle about from 60 to 50 million years. So you have 60 million years at the time of the Deccan placement. So this system have to be linked together. The moment where the high-velocity anomaly enters into the lower mantle and is the same of the moment where you have this Deccan plateau emplacement, and in fact the India is keep going very, very fast at the time. So that's very interesting. We are looking at completely different style of origin now in India. Basically, first of all, we think that there is no discussion. Slab pool cannot be an efficient force to move India now at this rate. It's because the slab is broken off, so it cannot move 5 centimeters per year. And then the circuit we think it works is a mantle circuit with downwelling, upwelling system doing this conveyor belt, and this is going down to the lower mantle. And so a large-scale circuit. And under this condition, then you may form a completely different type of mountain. First of all, it's a double vergent mountain, and then you can thicken your crust very much. So you go against gravity a lot. That's my point. Okay, but this applies also to other origin. So is this a general rule or just a specific for the case of Arabia? So for this case, we have to look at more largely the problem. And our Tethyan belt is here somewhere, and you all know that beneath Africa there is this large low-velocity shear province that is flooring at 2,500 kilometers, more or less, the core mantle boundary. And the Cordillera is on the other side. And this is interesting because when you look at the high-velocity anomaly, now we are 1,000 kilometers, those two signal in the lower mantle, they should probably, on both sides of this large low-velocity province, they probably have to connect somehow each other. And this goes back to an idea that Andavai had some years ago, and I think it's very, very relevant, on the idea that you can treat the Indo-Atlantic as a box, basically. There are two slabs, and in the middle of that, you have a large low-velocity shear province. Can be excited by the slab, and this system have to work together. So if it's true for the system of Himalaya, that should be also true for the Cordillera. So we went to look at that. First of all, if you do an equatorial section, then you have this kind of result. This is pretty well known. You have two areas where you have downwelling, two areas where you have upwelling, so it's forming this degree 2 kind of textbook images that everybody has in mind. The problem of that is that I don't think this is, you can go very back in time with this kind of measurements, because we just see that the penetration in the lower mantle of the Tethyan slab occurred only 60 million years ago. So probably this is okay for the tertiary, but we don't know what was for the Mesozoic. And what happened in the Cordillera? This is you can go and zoom a little bit more in the tail of that. And this is a recent result that we had. In the Cordillera, the high velocity anomaly at 1,000 kilometers, more or less depth, go only on the north of 30 degree, 25 degree. You arrive to 28 degree, and there is nothing on the south, first of all. And then if you restore the position of the trench in time, then you can virtually give constraint to the time of penetration, and this cannot be older than 50 to 60, or because otherwise your trench, your subduction zones should have been reclined backward. So the timing of penetration cannot be more than 50, 60, basically, because when the trench was there, the high velocity is here, so it cannot be. And in fact, this is what you obtain on the surface. This is the deep root of the Cordillera, a very large, very nice high velocity zone crossing the 660 discontinuity, going down to about 1,000 kilometers and then nothing more. And on the surface, again, we have, this is from Armijo, recent paper, you have the same structure, basically in small of what we saw before on the Tibet. So it's again a double vergent wedge with a lot of crustal thickness on top. Can we really demonstrate that this is the cause of the start of an orogeny? Well, this is interesting in the Cordillera. We have a very good chronology of timing of shortening. And along strike, we already saw that the high velocity anomaly at 1,000 kilometers stop about 25 degrees south. So if you do a cross-section here, the high velocity anomaly penetrates into the mantle only from Bolivia northward, more or less. And when you look at the onset of shortening, it's very interesting that the only side part of in this area where the slab penetrates into the lower mantle, the onset of shortening occurs around 55 to 50. And when you go southward, that is much younger. So this is very interesting because it seems that the timing of mantle penetration, slab penetration to the lower mantle, we say around 50 to 60, it just matches the timing of the onset of shortening. And only in the area where the slab penetrates. And this is actually the area where you do have more crustal thickening because on Patagonia, the thickening of the crust is not that much and the shortening as well. So just to point it out, if you do a cross-section, you have these beautiful images of the high-velocity anomaly crossing the 660, and the position of the trench in time should occur here. So at the time of the penetration, you start having the condition to build up a big mountain. And so basically you anchor the slab at depth, and so the trench doesn't move backward anymore, and therefore you pull your South American plate, and you form that. And then you can restore, basically, your slab penetrating and folding, for example, on the 660, etc., etc. So just a numerical model. This is a very simple test to illustrate this concept. You have the slab arriving to the 660, and when it touches, then you have the start of the shortening. This is the sigma XX, so it means the shortening. That became white, so very high, so in pressure. So as soon as you have the slab penetrated, you start having compression on the upper plate. And this is fundamentally because of two things. First, you have the anchoring on the lower mantle, so that the slab doesn't go backward anymore. It's not happy to do that. And the second thing is that you install a large return flow that brings the upper plate against the trench. So that's the reason behind. So let me summarize a little bit this concept. I think, first of all, what we learned from this experiment is that if you do have high-resolution seismic data, then you can capture very small-scale convection. And this is probably operating along all the subduction zone on Earth. The second point is that when you go larger scale, on the certain area, you can also detect this large-scale cell, of course. And we think that there is one that is operating between South America and Africa in the Tethys. So the fact that you have these two big mountain belts, the Cordillera and the Tethyan Cordillera, the Tethyan orogeny, that are enclosing this large low-velocity province. So every time a little blob of slab goes down, it probably vigorously excite the large low-velocity shear zone, and you form a plume. So these circuits go together. I don't know who is driving what, but this go together. And if you do have that, then you can form mountain. In this case, and the mountain are completely different from the one we saw in the small-scale case, are very thick, and then usually is a double vergent wedge. And irrespective of the nature of the subducting plate, Himalaya and Cordillera work in the same way. So even if the Cordillera is not in a collisional zone, because it's subducting, there's an oceanic subduction there, it is basically the same process operating. It's a large-scale convection that is driving that. This is our opinion. But if it's true, I mean, it means that we can use this signature on surface also for very old episode of mantle penetration. We can take the orogenic cycle and go back in time to make a calendar of slab penetration. This is something that we know in the tertiary, but probably we had the same at the end of the Paleozoic, etc. So this is the classical images that we have for the mountain belt. Orogenic wedge and very big plateau. The people think usually that you can go from one system to the other, just increasing the magnitude of convergence. And we don't think it's the case. When you want to reach a very thick crust, then you should have extra force operating in the system. We think that if you want to go from a orogenic wedge, like in the Mediterranean, to a plateau, like in the Himalaya, you have to change the scale of convection. This is what we call slab pool orogeny. This is slab suction orogeny. So the system here can have a convergence protract for tens of million years, and only under this condition you form 80 kilometers of crust. And you can go from one side to the other side just by, for example, let accumulating material on the 660 and then it's penetrating. Once you have that, you can go from a slab pool style to slab suction style, and if you have break off, then you can come back, forming a kind of orogenic cycle. I think this is an interesting concept we should explore. So let me finish with some outlook. I think my personal experience, is that I am my basic trainer, structural geologist, but then I was interested in the mantle dynamics more and more during my career, and I think there is a need to search more for signal of mantle dynamics on the surface, and this requires joint effort between different expertise, of course, between geologists, geomorphologists, and mantle dynamists, of course. And in particular, I think that to demonstrate that what we are discussing is real, for example, dynamic topography is a very interesting object to analyze, but we do need a high-resolution experiment done in specific site where we can really have capture high-resolution structure in terms of seismic structure and geological structure. So, and also the problem of all what I presented here is that all the models we use are very, very simple. The dichotomy between these two communities, the lithospheric and the mantle community, derive basically from that we are not able to have a model that contains the subtlety of the lithospheric structure embedded within a mantle convection system. This is too far from us at the moment. But we have to move in that direction, because otherwise we will not be able to disentangle what is the contribution of what, of course. And then, so maybe more integrated science program can work. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Claudio, I enjoyed your talk. Can you tell us more about your layered viscosity structure? Because I imagine that your results of modeling are very sensitive to viscosity contrast.
Yeah, of course. In the experiment, in the model we done, for example, for you're talking about this kind of model or the convection one? Any of them? Okay. We usually basically use a very, very simple structure, like with the viscosity jump of 50 from the upper mantle to the lower mantle. We do explore also different range, from 10 to 100, and even more. And we also explore this non-Newtonian viscosity effect. Every time we change, of course, the ratio, it changes. Sorry, I didn't show the viscosity structure here, sorry. It changed the time scale, but not the process. So it changed the time, the magnitude of the velocity, for example, of India would change, or the time scale here of this million year, but not change the main trend of the process. So yes, it modulates the timing, but not the main result, basically constant. So we started with a very simple, all I've shown you is very, very basic. We didn't try, also the assumption, we didn't really look on chemical composition on the global scale. So of course, when you go deeper in the on the large low velocity province, we do have problems. Probably we overestimated the buoyancy of this system. But we decided expressively to leave it as simple as possible in a way to capture the first order process. Then, of course, everything had to be done in the sense. Sure.
Maybe I'm forced, but I think some times ago with Laurent, you had a model with that was the closure of the Tethys, and that changed the motion of Africa, then of South America, and then the behavior of the trench, and that was the reason of initiation of the Andes.
Right.
So can you comment on this?
Yeah,
apparently you changed your mind
a
little. Because there you are saying that this is mostly the anchoring of the slab that initiates the origin.
With Laurent we were proposing the same story. I mean, this is a little bit more elaborated. Actually, the concept that we done with Laurent was fundamentally the same. What we're trying to do here is to explore more our regional scale, to try to see, for example, along strike, what changed moving from the area where you have slab penetration to the not slab penetration. So we have a direct test of this kind of hypothesis. And then there we also try to make an estimate, for example, of the volume of material that we have here. And surprisingly enough, if you take this is a MIT model. We take several of these models. So we test 7 tomography models. And surprisingly enough, beneath the South America, there is not much. There's just this. And also beneath the Atlantic, there's not much high velocity anomaly. So despite the fact that you have subduction going for a long time, despite the fact you have South America drifting apart and reaching the present day position from 120 million years and 30 million years, you have only this. And actually, the reason why is probably the fact that the subduction was a very young ocean all the time, for a long time. So probably the signature and seismic signature of that is not that relevant. And you can have rid of all these subduction zone in 60 to 70 million years only, all this high velocity zone, as a velocity anomaly. So that's we found very interesting. We explore a little bit more that concept, and then we include that. So it's a continuation of this idea, exactly the same, but a little bit more elaborated for the case of, yeah. No, there's no big difference. We actually have a paper on that press. It's inspired very much by the first paper we done with Laurent.
Good talk, thank you. For a model on India, you didn't model the plume, the mantle plume that probably originated Deccan traps. Do you think this would make any difference, and in which way?
Yeah.
Maybe by lubricating the asthenosphere with hot material, so maybe it could play a role.
That's a very good point, Cinzia, sure. Our model include our model of India. Yeah, there's 2 answers on that. It's very interesting, actually. Our model of India is basically driven by the fact that you have the Kazbek Ridge here, that is basically the source of the Deccan plume. So we just limit it to the present day, okay? The Deccan is here, and the track of the Deccan going down there, and basically is now here. This is a very large upwelling zone, high velocity, low velocity anomaly. So it is there, our plume, Of course, we are looking at today structure. Okay. What is very interesting to answer into your question is if you have one little patience of time, I can go through some of the additional slides I have here. Sorry. Not here, not here. What is to understand better the role of not here. Okay. This is the tomography model we use. So it's a low velocity anomaly here, the Tethyan is here, the depth here is, I don't know, it's an average upper mantle depth should be though. So with this kind of model, we obtain that. If we take the P-wave model, even from the same group, it doesn't have any images of what happened basically into the Kazbek ridge, and the result of that. So there is basically no Kazbek plume just because of no resolution. No. Okay, but the result is this one. So if you take out, we test expressively that. If you take out this upwelling here, your India is not moving anymore. So this is to answer you. We done tests with the 20 tomography model. So, and every of them have a different kind of peculiarity, and India is reacting to that in a different way. So that's, I think, is very interesting. The role of the upwelling is fundamental. If you don't have upwelling, you don't have origin. My idea is that you have to have a circuit of upwelling, downwelling to protract your collision for 50 million years. Only under this condition you can thicken your crust of more than 60 kilometers. That's the point. Here and in the case of the Altiplano in Cordillera. So you do have origin only where you have plumes. This is the result, which is kind of provocative statement, but I think so. Or, yeah.
Just as a follow-up, a very nice talk. As a follow-up of what you just said, could you make a parallel with the formation of the first continents in the Archean? I mean, does it mean that you need to have plumes in the Archean to be able to create the first continents? Or how do you envision that part of the story?
No comment. I'm unable to give a reasonable comment on that, yeah. But yes, if this story is right, probably it's not, but if it's right, I'm spending quite a lot of time on that, then I think we should go back in time and looking at signature of that, and think that about the Archean collision or whatever. Because the way the material from the surface penetrate down to a lower mantle depth is not continuous, it's episodic, and this is clear. And it's probably even not distributed only on a specific site. And also, this is the way the material go up from this large low velocity province is discontinuous, it's not continuous, we know that. So, every time you have an episode of that, you should have a reflex on the surface. We take mountain building as a possibility to sign that. Maybe there are other signals, for example, seafloor spreading, for example, but this may be a signal. So that we thought could be, but yeah, we have to go back in time, and I still didn't have the time to look at the calendar back in time. That's a very good point. If you can help me, I would be happy.
D'autres questions? Non? Vous êtes épuisé? Ok, bon ben donc on remercie encore Claudio pour son séminaire.
Merci.